Welcome to Brew House. We are so glad that you have joined us. This is a weekly podcast and videocast series. We make fun of bad coffee. We love drinking good coffee. And more importantly, we really enjoy discussing and answering the tough questions that you guys, our wonderful audience, are asking us each and every week. So look forward to you guys tuning in. Every single week, we are going to answer a different question and just give you some of our thoughts and ideas around it. We would love participation, so please feel free to comment, email us, provide us feedback. We want to hear from you because this is only as good as the questions you ask.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. This is episode 6. We're going to be talking about some highly controversial stuff today because we're talking about
Highly controversial
thoughts,
and specifically
polarization of thoughts. But before we get to that place, we're going to end up.
There is something that polarizes more people around the world than maybe even politics.
Yes.
And that's coffee.
Yes, coffee, because some people, like my dad, would call Folgers coffee.
Which we've already assessed,
yes,
affirmed.
That maybe
we have affirmed that Folgers is not coffee.
Yeah, it's nasty. So, the last 4 weeks, or actually 5 weeks, we've been highlighting coffee that have been sent to us. One from the States, a whiskey barrel coffee, phenomenal coffee. And then we had coffee come in from Vancouver Island, which was a drum roaster coffee, which was fantastic. Drum roasters, awesome. We do have a local roaster.
There is. We both enjoy them.
Yes, we do. And we go to a coffee shop just right down the road from us, from our church. It's called Euphoria. Great place.
Great little cafe. Local business. Support
good stuff. Yes. And I find that their roasts are most of the time really, really good. And so today we have a roast from them, a coffee from them.
Yep.
It's Santa Lucia
Rosso coffee.
This is going to be supposedly a little mellow, soft on the palate.
Okay.
It's going to have chocolate, almond, whatever marzipan is.
Wow. Okay.
Kind of.
We got some flavor in this guy.
Yes. So whatever that is, but this would be, I think, their take on a classic.
All right.
Cup of coffee. So
and we should note, as those watching on YouTube can see, we have made coffee the appropriate method today.
We're already disagreeing.
And that is we are polarized on this.
We are for sure.
But Shane's wrong, and that's okay. We've made coffee the correct way, and that is with a French press. Now we touched on this in the first season, but I'll maybe mention a few things. With a French press, it's similar to tea in that you're steeping the coffee for a longer period of time. So your point is to get a little bit more of the aroma and the notes out of the coffee.
Okay.
If you really like the flavor profiles of coffee, that's typically when people use a French press. Or if you enjoy getting a little bit more of the tart, with a French press, you get more of the oil.
Yes.
Out of a coffee bean, the natural oils that are in it, because again it soaks and then you're pouring it out. You're not just pouring water through the bean.
Because a filter catches more than just coffee grinds.
Exactly. It catches some of those oils and minerals. And so you'll know a French press coffee because it'll look a little more cloudy. Mm-hmm. You'll see when you see oil on top of a surface, you'll kind of see it sitting on top of the coffee. Mm-hmm. That's how you know you've done a really good French press. Brewed it at a nice solid 95 degrees Celsius. You let it steep for a couple minutes, usually about 2 to 3 minutes for a French press. Make sure that it's nice and hot, and then you pour.
So there is one thing I would like to say to that, and I guess the reason why I don't like a French press, I love a good coffee from a French press.
Right.
However, not all coffees should go into a French press.
That is correct.
And that's the reason why I'm not a big fan of it, is because sometimes you get the oils you don't want in the coffee, and it can turn out to be a really poor experience.
Yep.
But coffee that really, and you can even ask this as you go in. Now, don't go to a grocery store and ask them. They're not going to have a clue. Go to a coffee shop where they have their own roast and ask them, hey, I drink from a French press.
Yeah. What's a good roast?
What's a good roast for me to have? And they might say none right now, or they might say this one is a good one.
One of the things that I would suggest on a French press is you're typically going to look for a lighter roast.
Okay. No black shiny beans.
No black shiny beans. Because again, you're steeping the beans, the grounds in it. If it's a dark coffee, if it's a dark roast, or even leaning towards a darker roast, it's going to taste really heavy, right? Whereas a French press is really good for a morning coffee, a light roast, a blonde roast, as some call it. Usually on a coffee pack, you'll have that roast scale on the back. You want to find something a 4 or less on a French press. That's going to be your sweet spot for French press.
Now, one of the things, though, with the French press that I think people need to hear if they haven't used one, I typically like my coffee ground finer.
Yes.
Okay, so most of my coffees are usually ground on the higher, I ground them myself, I'll say, but usually ground at the higher level of espresso.
Correct.
That's probably not what you want for a French press.
On a pour over, on an espresso, you're going to grind it more fine because you want to get more flavor out of it. Because you're passing water through it, it only has so much time to really get that flavor profile. Whereas on a French press, it's going to sit there, so you don't have to grind it as much.
So a little coarser.
A little coarser, it's going to pull the flavor out a little bit more.
Okay.
So I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing a fine grind in a French press. Just don't let it steep as long.
Now, everyone's going to be shocked. Well, not really, because I said this a few weeks ago. I took a coffee brewing class.
You did.
And I will say, I was skeptical going in. We started with a Mr. Coffee pot.
Okay.
All the way into the high-end coffee pot that I have at home.
Right.
Okay? And I will tell you this, the same roast of coffee tastes different in every single way we brewed
100%.
it. And so a French press is going to have a different flavor than a pour-over.
Yep.
Or what's the other one that I have? It's kind of a reverse
AeroPress.
AeroPress.
It's a reverse French press.
I use that. And so I find, again, right coffee with a French press, it's rich, it's a good experience. Wrong coffee.
So if you try a French press and you don't like it, that's okay. You're wrong, but that's okay. That's okay. You can make coffee the wrong way, which is any way besides a French press.
Okay, well, I'm just going to let you sit with that one.
There we go.
It's got nice notes to it. Great smell.
That's a really bright coffee. Not super tart, not super pungent, but it's very bright, very welcoming.
Now I will say that I've used this. Our church coffee pot that we use is a new one from Breville. It's a really nice. It grinds the beans and puts it right in the filter and that kind of thing. Really nice coffee.
Similar to a French press, it'll let the beans soak for a little while.
Anyway, if you like, coffee that way, the Breville one is really nice. I will say that I like the coffee better in this, the French press version, than the drip.
Yes.
This one has a little bit more depth to the flavor profile. So it's actually quite nice. So this would be a coffee I would be okay drinking from a French press.
Wow. Words I never thought I'd hear.
But not if it was like an African coffee, very fruity.
As a good point of example, the roast we had on last week, the last one we had from Drum Roasters. Thank you again to Drum Roasters for their sample pack they sent up for us. That was delicious. But that last coffee, it was a bit of a darker roast.
Yep.
It would not have been a good choice for a French press because it would have tasted really heavy. That tart raspberry flavor would have been really super tart.
The punch on the back end of that would not have been nice.
So if you're learning to brew coffee and make it different ways, the thing that we would both suggest, play around with it. Try coffee different ways. Try the same coffee through different methods, and you'll learn. It's all about experimentation.
Well, and there might be local coffee shops near you that you could take a brewing class from.
100%.
And I would highly suggest that. I know that really puts me at a pretty high end of snobbery, but I really enjoyed it. And as a matter of fact, it was at Drum Roasters. I took the coffee brewing class.
There you go. Well, for everyone listening, the impossible has happened, and Shane and I have agreed on good French press coffee.
That's a good one.
Even though we're polarized on the subject, we came to a place of understanding. Now let's see if we can come to a place of understanding on the subject today.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to say Rosso, Santa Lucia, great coffee. Rosso, you did a great job. Euphoria, thanks for having it in stock. Great job.
All right, we'll see you guys on the other side. All right, well, welcome back to episode 6 of season 2 on Brew House. We're really excited. So the last couple weeks, our conversation has been leading up to this, and that is this idea of polarization of thought. And specifically, in the
We
world,
don't see this at all.
we don't see this anymore. But in our world around us, in a time where there's probably more polarization than recent memory.
Yes.
At least in my lifetime.
And in mine.
Now, as we talked about last week, I'm a
I
little
said and in mine.
a little younger than yours, but in yours too.
Listen here. Don't make me discipline you.
That means something different in your day than mine.
Yes, for sure. You're grounded.
Oh boy.
Even though for me it was more of a spanking. But anyway.
there you go.
There you go.
So, you lost me there.
I did. But we're talking about polarization of thought.
You're just returning you're returning the favor from last week
Yes.
where I had you killing yourself.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So
Polarization of thought. How do you deal with it? And specifically, like we've been doing all season, how do we deal with polarization through this faith-informed and faith-answered mindset? How does our faith, how do the lessons that we find in Scripture, the values that it encourages us to adopt, how do those allow us to approach polarization regardless of what end of the spectrum we're on? Because I want everyone to understand, just like we all believe in something, all of us exist somewhere on a polarized scale.
for sure.
Whether it be politics, whether it be faith, no matter what it is, all of us exist somewhere. All of us are a byproduct of our culture, of our families, of our spheres of influence. So we all exist in some place.
Yes. From where you went to school, the books you read, the entertainment you listened to.
All of it.
All of that informs us. And so here's the thing. Everybody thinks differently
Yep.
about something. Nobody walks around thinking and agreeing to everything about life. However, this which we've talked about in this recent time that we're in, there's always been, if I can use the word, there's always been schools of thought about things. However, I would take the word school out and say now there's polarized thoughts or thinking that we're now identified by. And polarization is not a good thing because that means I have my set of ideas.
Correct.
And if you don't agree to my set of ideas, then you can't be in.
Right. Now you're out.
And we live in this weird time, and we talked about this in a past episode about the idea of group identity and how dangerous that is. But group identity and polarization of thought are really two powerful motivators right now.
Well, it's fascinating. If you look at, and this goes back to our conversation last week about faith versus society, but in culture right now, in society, you have this whole idea of cancel culture, where if we don't agree with something, society and culture is so powerful that they, en masse, group mentality, they will go out and make sure it dies, it ends. And in some avenues, that has been incredibly healthy, right? Stamping out a lot of racism, sexual exploitation, a variety of things that I think everyone can look at and go, yeah, that's bad. But there's danger in that because that same culture says we are the most accepting society ever. We accept everyone from all backgrounds, of all faiths, of all creeds, except if you believe these things. And then we're going to exclude you. And the danger becomes, then they're not willing to have a conversation about it. You have to enter into their group before they're willing to sit down. And that's not something we find in Scripture. So
they won't even value you unless you're in their group. And what you just said, I just want to say this. Cancel culture is so dangerous. We even talk about hate speech. I would rather hear hate speech because then I know what's happening in that person's heart.
Right.
I can say, because if you ban the speech, you don't ban the hate.
Nope.
And I think
it just hides.
Exactly. And speech and language is how we convey ideas. And ideas can't be changed if we're not talking about them. And I know it's really become critical. Now, I'm going to say something here that's no shock to you, but might be a shock to some people.
Yep.
I don't like Trump.
Whoa.
At all.
There you go.
Never have. I think some of his ideas were good, but his treatment of people were really bad.
Right.
So he gets kicked off all social media platforms.
Right.
Okay? That's bad. That's a bad thing. Even though I don't agree with a lot of it,
Right.
it's still bad to ban the speech because, again, how do you know the ideas of someone? How can you change your ideas if you're not allowing the conversation to take place?
I've had this conversation with a few people, and that is, and we see this in Scripture, the emphasis is on you. The invitation to begin moving in a healthy direction is on you. And by that, I mean, we are always in a constant state in our current society and culture for someone else to make the first move. To say, when you change, then we can sit down and have a conversation.
For sure. And I will say this. I'm not a Biden fan either.
Right.
Okay. So if anybody knows me, they know I don't like politics.
You don't like any politician.
Exactly. So, but I don't want him banned either.
Right.
Because believe it or not, I do think there is something to learn. I may not agree.
Yep.
But there's something to learn. And if I'm not willing to learn, if I'm not willing, like you just said, if I'm not willing to enter into a relationship and say, I am the one who needs to learn, or there's something to learn from you, that I don't know everything. If I'm not willing to do that, then we don't get anywhere. And as leaders, if we're not willing to enter into every relationship we have with saying there's something for me to learn, there's something for me to gain from listening to you, understanding where you come from, and I might even change, or I might not change. If we're not willing to do that as leaders, then the people we're leading are going to really be at a deficit.
Oh, for sure. Well, so I had someone ask me this question the other day. They said, how am I supposed to learn about polarization from Jesus? Jesus never lived in a time where there was polarization. Jesus never lived in a time where we were dealing with all this. And I had a good little chuckle to myself. And I said, okay,
actually, it was more polarized.
Let's have a conversation about that. Because I think in the way Jesus approached people, we often skip over the society in which he treated people. Because he existed in a Jewish society that was actually under Roman persecution.
Yep.
The Romans had come down. They had basically captured the entire Middle East into their empire, and every region had a governor overseeing them that then was transforming their culture from what the Jews had fought so long, so hard for. You have to understand, Jews had gone through so much oppression already. And from the time that they returned from Egypt till the time the Romans come down, they are in a constant war after war after war just to keep their little nation independent.
Well, and one of the things that's even crazy about the Roman occupation, if we want to call it that, is that the priests that were operating in Jesus' day had to be stamped, approved by the Roman government. And so we can see, and I don't think we're far from it, the danger that takes place when all communication, even religious communication, has to be government approved. I think that's a really bad place to go. However, I want to interrupt you and say this. Jesus had to navigate. You know this. He had to navigate this. Okay? And so when we're talking about this, there's not a third option of neutrality, that I will never be affected by any polarizing thought. I'm just going to be in my bubble and move happily through life.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work because it can't happen. And so I think that's where the conversation is going to go today, is that what we talked about last week, there's a way that faith in Jesus navigates these polarizing views. And believe it or not, Jesus spent a lot of time not falling into these polarizing traps.
Well, and again, if we go back to the life of Jesus, he is living in a culture that is 100% Jewish-centric.
Yep.
Jewish culture, Jewish practice that is now being heavily influenced into a worldly culture, because the Roman Empire, for all extents and purposes, was the world.
But let's also add this. the Jewish people also were elitist.
Very.
They thought they were the only people of God.
They thought they were the only people. They thought they knew the right way to live.
Exactly.
Right? And so now they're approaching it. Someone else is coming by and telling them, actually, you live a different way.
Right.
But even within the Jewish community, you had Jews that were Roman favored and those that were plotting to go to war with them even though they had been conquered. And so Jesus is not only preaching to the religious community that is in conflict with one another, but he's preaching to a Jewish community that is at war politically with each other. At the same time, he's preaching to a Middle Eastern audience from surrounding areas, as well as to Romans that are now flooding into Jerusalem because they're allowed to be there. And they have a whole different religious, socioeconomic,
100%.
and cultural ideology. And so he's now approaching a group of people that for his period of life is the most diverse, polarized group of people. There would be Jews in Jesus' time that would not be seen with Romans because they didn't eat kosher, they didn't live kosher,
Right.
and to them, I will never be associated with that person.
Right.
And Jesus goes, I'm going to sit down with both.
Yep. Well, and one of the things I think is really important, just to let you know where Jesus comes from, he came from the wrong side of the tracks.
Right.
Like Jesus came from a place when he would say his hometown.
You just preached on this.
Yes, I did. Even his followers, the people who followed him said, is there anything good that can come from his hometown? Like, he was not like some well-approved socioeconomical right tribe, none of that kind of stuff, right?
And this is in a period of history, and Jewish culture was no different. Your family stature, your status, had so much influence on where you went with life. Very little different than today's culture, where if you're born into privilege, you usually have more opportunities.
Right.
Different back then, but similar, in that if you came from a high priestly family, you had the ability to enter into the temple and learn that Jewish tradition in a way that if you came from a carpenter's family, you didn't.
Yeah, you were kind of an elite class. You know, the carpenter class was not elite, and I think
because Jesus was a carpenter.
No, it wasn't. But that's another episode for another day. But even don't destroy our.
I'm knocking things over on camera here.
But one of the things that's really important for us to understand is that not only was Jesus rejected because of his hometown rejected him because he didn't have the pedigree to be a prophet or to be a teacher. We would say even more to be God Messiah. So Jesus didn't fit in anywhere.
Nowhere. In fact,
not at all.
The religious elite of that day. So this is a great story to highlight it. The religious elite of his day were actually trying to trap Jesus in his ideology.
Yes.
Because they saw it as dangerous.
100%.
Jesus was coming along and he was throwing caution to the wind to them of just radically changing the mindset of the people and how they could approach faith.
Right.
Right? So there's a story that comes from Matthew. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, you know what? This is pretty interesting because as you just laid out, you know, it's an understatement to say that Jews did not appreciate Romans.
They were not fans of each other.
Exactly. They didn't like each other at all. And so there was a group of what we would call Pharisees, which were kind of an elite religious type of group. Then that's usually where your priest came from. Tried to trap him with a question. So I'll just read it to you and see what you think. The Pharisees met together to plot how to trap Jesus into saying something, again, speech, saying something for which he could be arrested. Think about that. We're seeing that right now. We're not far from this. They sent some of their disciples along with supporters of Herod. He was kind of like a king,
regional
more like
governor.
That was a Roman representative, but he was Jewish kind of thing.
Not loved by a lot of Jews.
Exactly. And supporters of Herod to meet him. they come to him and they say, "Teacher," they said, "we know how honest you are. You teach the ways of God truthfully. You are impartial and don't play favorites." Right then, you could tell this is a loaded question. They're setting him up. "Now tell us what you think about this. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Listen to that. Is it right to pay taxes? But Jesus knew their evil motives. And again, not wanting to make friends, which Jesus doesn't seem like.
Doesn't pull punches
Yep.
here.
He says, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Here, show me the coin used for the tax." When they handed him a Roman coin, he asked, "Whose picture and title are stamped on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. "Well, then," he said, "give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God." His reply amazed them and they went away.
I love it.
So we can see here, this is again, polarization of thought conversation.
Yep.
Here's a guy, Jesus, who I would say nobody knew what to do with.
Right.
Because he didn't fit in really groups. He really didn't fit in anywhere. We'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Yep.
And so they think, okay, we can trap him. We can prove he's not from God, and we can get him arrested and killed, and he's out of our hair.
Great.
Problem
dealt with.
We're going to get him to take either sides with Rome, which means he's anti-us.
Yep.
Or he's going to take sides with us and be anti-Rome, and then he'll be in trouble.
Great.
And what Jesus does is unbelievable. He takes a middle position.
He takes a middle position, but not a neutral position.
Right. He does say, hey, the currency, who does it belong to? Well, it's a Roman currency. He says what? Well, give
to Caesar's what is Caesar's.
Exactly, because it's Caesar's. What's God's is God's. So he's clever in the ground that he's taking. He doesn't say, no, don't pay your taxes. And then he's not saying, no, what's of God's is not God's. But he does take a position that, hey, both are right. Give to God what's God's, and give to Caesar what's Caesar's. But I love the fact he called them hypocrites to begin with. And I think in this position, and I know people are going to probably not like my analogy here, but I think these guys are representative of the modern day reporter. They're asking loaded questions to get you to take a position so that they can later criticize your position on.
Right. I mean, it is dangerous in that mindset of, if you're trapped in one ideology or another. And this is where polarization of thought becomes so dangerous in our society, in that we are often told we need to pick this side or that side. If we select a position on something about, say, financial responsibility in government, well, as soon as we take a position on that, we are now labeled either liberal or conservative. If we take a position on, marijuana and the legality around it, we're now either conservative or we're liberal.
Yep.
And the concept is that, well, if you select a position, you now belong to this camp and you're painted with that brush, and we will crucify you for everything that group responds. It is remarkably similar to this idea that these Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus, because no matter which way they think he's going to answer, they have him.
Yep.
And that's what our ideology in our society does, because as soon as you take a position on something, the other side, they got you.
Yep.
And Jesus is remarkably brilliant in this, in saying that, listen, guys, you're really what he's telling them is you're asking the wrong question. Because what's Caesar's, give it to Caesar. And what's God, give it to God's. Because both sides have valid claims in this area.
And they were amazed that his answer was right.
They couldn't rebuke him.
Exactly. It was a right answer. It was a right way to view the circumstance that he was put in, with the decision that he had to make. It was the right view, right answer. And I think this idea around thought and speech and how critical it is, but also how like, it's even got to the point where I can't even ask questions without being judged. Well, Shane, if you're questioning that about Jesus or that about God, then are you losing your faith?
Right.
Are you one of those preachers? I mean, and you know this, not too long ago, there was a person in our church that was attending that I preached a different version of hell. Right? Of afterlife and what happens to a non-Jesus follower after death. And I showed historically that was historically held by the church, right? And this person got so mad, he went around telling everyone I was a heretic and a false teacher because of one little thing we disagreed on. And I think that's the danger of really the culture that we find ourselves in, is we can't even ask a question or even promote or think about an idea because, well, if you do that, you're one of them.
Well, it's because we associate different ideologies with a broader spectrum of decision making. So by that, if you believe one thing about hell in this instance, well, by extension, you probably believe all of these other things as well. And we constantly in society, we make assumptions about people based on the decisions they make, and we begin putting them into camps, and then because they now exist over here in this camp, we treat everything they do with a certain lens rather than really engaging in conversation and dialogue, right? And it's very similar. So in this example of Jesus, right, where the Pharisees are amazed and they're turned away, I'm sure they never tried to trap Jesus again because they appreciated that he took a middle ground and showed them wisdom and knowledge and how to have conversation.
Right? No, they did again, and they did so in a way. This next story is actually a really cool story.
I set that up.
Yes, you did. It was wonderful. You set that up.
As my wife says, I'm not very subtle.
No, not at all. You're actually a great Padawan to my Jedi Master.
There we go. Thank you very much.
And I don't even like Star Wars.
I love Star Wars.
However, I'll tell you this. If you ever grow one of those lame ponytails off the one side of your head, I will shave that.
My hair is getting a little long. I could try it.
Well, the ponytail's fine, but just not that one little branch out the side.
Not the little braid?
Not the Padawan braid.
All right.
But anyway,
tell me about this other story of Jesus.
So this other story of Jesus, the first time the religious people tried to trap Jesus, it was around politics.
Right.
Okay? This next trap that they set for him is actually around a religious institution or religious faith, or what they would say, right?
Yep.
And so this is really interesting. And again, what do we see predominantly today? We see that these become probably the two biggest polarizers in our culture today is religion and politics. And what this religion believes versus what that religion believes, politics versus what parties, the whole 9 yards.
All of it.
So this one is more around the religious institutions of the law, which was the guiding factor of Jewish culture. It's how you lived, it's how you treated people, it's how you worship God, it's how you viewed God, the whole 9 yards. And so they are, Jesus is minding his own business, teaching people, doing what Jesus does, which is usually really good for people. And then they come to this story. Now, you're going to read this story, and then we'll talk about it. But before we do it, I want to say that this story was so controversial.
Very.
That there were people, the church fathers, who some of them did not want to put this story
They didn't want to include it.
They didn't want it in the Bible because they were worried it would give too lenient of a view of Jesus and sin.
I find that fascinating, and I agree. Like you and
Polarization
I have
of thought.
teaching. Polarization of thought. Even the disciples, even the early church fathers were not immune to the effects of polarization because they were worried this would lean people too far in a direction that they were uncomfortable with. And that's what, this story does a great job. Jesus is not concerned about where people end up, right? He wants them, you can be over here on the left, the right, doesn't matter, as long as these values around people are paramount.
I got to say this. I don't know if you realized what you just said there, but it's profound. People end up about where they end up. Jesus is concerned about following, moving, progressing,
That's it.
learning, growing. And you can't do that stuck in polarizing places.
Nope.
Now, interestingly enough, as we get into this story, I want you to know this is still true of religious institutions today. That's why we have denominations or conferences.
Yep.
Is because they couldn't get along. They celebrated more what separated them than what brought them together. You and I are in a conference right now.
Correct.
And sometimes you and I have had the conversation that, man, why are we talking about things that separate us? Shouldn't in this time we be talking about the things that we have in common, the things we're moving forward? And I don't want to be too hard on our conference. They do what conference things do. And they do some important work. However, I just want to say that this is still in operation. So we're not saying this is societal only.
No.
This is deep within church tradition, and it's sad that it's in deep church tradition. So anyway, so they didn't want to put this story in Scripture.
It's a great story.
And it's a powerful story. It's believe it or not, it's my favorite Jesus story. I actually have a triptych painting.
Yes, you do.
Of this done by Chelsea Dolman, a person at New Life who lived on Vancouver Island near Drum Roasters.
Great things come from Vancouver Island.
Yes, and she did this painting for me. It's my favorite painting. It's my favorite story of all time.
Incredible. I love this story because it highlights the emphasis that Jesus really places on unity, not agreement, on unity. So it comes from John chapter 8. It says this: Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives. But early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and he began to teach.
Now, teaching means he was talking.
He was talking.
Okay.
He was using language.
Important here.
Expressing his ideology.
Okay.
And he was speaking. The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, which was, again, at that point in time, a big deal.
It was the woman's fault that there was adultery, not the man.
100%.
Okay.
They put her in the front of the crowd. This is a very public gathering, and this is now becoming a public trial. They're putting her on. They're putting her on stage, and they say, "Teacher," right? They're talking to Jesus. "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" So they're letting Jesus make the decision. They want to see if he is going to follow the religious teaching of the time, or if he's going to, as he's begun teaching this ideology of grace and compassion, if he's going to err away from the favored ideology of the time.
Can I point out a couple of things really quick before you continue reading? I want you to notice they didn't bring the man.
No.
Okay, and some translations would actually say the very act of adultery, like she was caught in this. So this isn't like a woman who was just known.
No.
This was a lady who was caught in the act of adultery.
Yep.
But they didn't bring the man.
No.
Okay, so that'll show you there already how they viewed the law,
Yes.
how they viewed their religious faith, all of those kind of things.
Right.
I just wanted to point that out.
So the story goes on, and it indicates that they were trying to trap him into saying they were trying to trap him into saying something that they could use against him. Just like the previous story,
right? They're
trying to get him to take a position that they can then use against him. But Jesus stopped, and he stepped down, and he wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and he said, "All right, settle down, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." And this is one of the incredible stories about Jesus.
This is a moment where they all went,
huh, and they froze. He agrees with them. Immediately, he does nothing, but he acknowledges their claim. By extension, he is acknowledging that, yes, this is exactly what the law of Moses says.
Doesn't defend her.
Yet. He says, you're right. That's what the law of Moses says. And go ahead. The person who has never sinned, they can be the first one to throw the first stone. Right?
Which is huge here, because I want to point this out. Now, religious institutions, talking about polarization of thought, religious institutions have always had a hierarchy of sin.
Right.
So if I'm just a liar, that's not as bad as being divorced. Or if I'm just a person who cheats on their finances, well, I'm not as bad as a gay person, or I'm not as bad. You see what I'm
we
saying?
create classifications.
Yeah.
Some things are worse than others.
Yeah, and so they've always done this. However, Jesus here does something remarkable. He says, if you're not guilty of any sin at all,
Then go ahead.
then pick up the stone and let her fly.
I love how this story is summarized, how it ends, because essentially what happens is, one by one, they leave.
Yes.
It says, when the accusers heard this, so the people, the very people, the Pharisees and the religious leaders that brought this woman in front of Jesus, when they heard what Jesus said, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then, and only then, did Jesus stand up again, and he said to the woman, "Where are your accusers?" He looks around. "Where are the people that brought you in front of me? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" She responds, "No, Lord." So Jesus responds to her and says, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more."
Now, this story is huge in so many ways. But one of the things that I've learned over the years is that coming from a faith tradition, when we encounter Jesus, we literally are the people usually at Jesus' feet. Because we've all have sinned.
Every one
All
of us.
of us. All of us have had bad thoughts. All of us had bad ideas. All of us have done bad things. All of us. And there is no category of sin with Jesus. They're all sin. Some of these things are all bad. And the sin is actually that I'm not perfect.
Yep.
I've missed the mark of perfection. And so that's incredibly powerful statement in and of itself. But then secondly here, we see that when it talks about the oldest to the youngest, some people actually say that age is a sign of wisdom. And that's what it's trying to convey here, that the oldest among them go, "Ho, there's wisdom here.
Yep.
And I'm not throwing stones." The youngest are full of zeal.
It also recognizes that the older we are, the more failings we've had.
Absolutely.
And those that were older would recognize, I've sinned a lot. I
Yep.
have no right to condemn this woman.
Yep.
The youngest, right? When we're young, we're pretty brash. We can be arrogant. I know I have been.
No.
I know.
No.
And those would be the ones that would have been likely going, let me think about this for a moment.
Yep.
Let me think about this. Let me see if I've ever sinned because I really want to condemn this woman.
Yep.
I want to go back for a quick second because the other aspect of this story that highlights the polarization, this is a period of time where Jewish culture is under attack.
Yes.
They are trying to protect. The religious leaders are worried that they will lose their Jewish faith.
Yes.
Their temples will cease to have power or authority over the people. And so sin or the issue of sin is becoming a paramount issue in the society.
For sure, because Romans,
They
didn't care about adultery, that kind of stuff.
The concept of sin to Romans was very difficult to understand.
Yep.
Very similar to our world's understanding of sin.
Yep.
A lot of people in our world look at things and they go, okay, yes, murder, bad.
Yep.
Right? Sexual exploitation, bad. Pornography,
Maybe not so bad.
okay. And so again, society had taken a stance one way, and Jewish faith was going, sin is the most important thing that we really need to drive home. And Jesus is going, sin is everywhere. Everyone has it. That's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is this woman and if she's loved.
Well, one of the incredible aspects about this story, and that shows you not only the radicalness of Jesus, because I think maybe they were expecting Jesus to actually pick up a stone
Yes.
and go, "Okay, guys, let's kill her right here."
Okay, you're right.
No trial, nothing. The man is scot-free.
Yep.
Let's kill her. And they would have joined in killing the woman had he been the
Had he
first one
picked
to
up a
pick a
stone.
stone
Correct.
to throw the stone. However, Jesus obviously flips it on its head and makes it about sin. And he says, "Okay, if you're without it, throw it."
Right.
Nobody's without sin. Huge, huge thing here. Which I want to say here, Jesus doesn't lamb blast them
Right.
about.
No.
He doesn't yell and scream at them. You bunch of
He's
idiots.
pretty easy on them.
He's like, he watches them walk away. And then he turns to the woman and gives her an impossible task.
Yes.
He says to her, go and sin no more.
Impossible to accomplish.
Now, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, okay, if maybe that didn't shake her up a bit and she went back to whatever she was doing in adultery.
Correct.
And they were to bring her back to Jesus and said, hey, you told her not to, she did, let's stone her. I think Jesus' response
would have been the exact
to the people and to her would have been the same. Because, see, Jesus is setting he's saying something here that's perfect. Go and sin no more.
Right.
But we're not capable of doing that.
Right.
Because we sinned even past salvation. We continue to sin. And see, I think this is where this is important to show that both politically and religiously, people were trying to trap Jesus into one or the other so that they could accuse him. Because if you say, hey, there's absolutely no way that this lady should be allowed to live, well, they're going to go, well, what's this grace you've been talking about? What's this acceptance that you've been talking about? What's this peace that you've been talking about? What's this idea of coming together in unity about? He wouldn't have had the leg to stand on. And if he would have said, guys, you're a bunch of morons. This lady, yeah, she's done it, but it's no big deal. They would have said, ha, see, you don't care about law. You don't care about God. There was a no win for him that it turns out to be a win. Because he refuses, in my opinion, to be identified with a group.
There's an aspect of the story we don't often talk about. And that is when they bring this woman in front of Jesus, we talk about this idea that they would have stoned a woman as if it's this atrocious act. It was done.
Yep.
They did it.
Yep.
For hundreds of years, this was a commonly accepted practice.
Yeah.
Culturally, religiously.
Yeah, and not just for adultery, but like
other crimes.
If you were in a same-sex relationship, they would take you outside the city and they would stone you. They would put you to death. Even if you disrespected your father,
they could do this.
They could do this, which is the huge scandal around the prodigal son.
And this is what highlights the polarization, because this is an accepted practice. This is something that the entire society and religious community would look at and go, yep, we accept this. And Jesus, in this polarizing time, says, guys, time to rethink. Because your intention is good. Your execution is poor. Because what they want is they want the sin stamped out. Now, we all know by this story, the man has never sinned. The man is not responsible for any sin. He's perfect and blameless.
Just the woman.
No issues, just the woman. We're being facetious. Please, if you're not watching us right now,
we know it's not
we're
just
joking.
the woman.
We're joking. But it's this example of Jesus saying, it's not one side or the other. There's this middle ground where I'm still taking a position. I'm not Switzerland. I'm not neutral. I'm not just trying to stay out of it. I'm not trying to get my hands dirty. When Jesus does this, he's getting his hands very dirty.
Oh, for sure.
The group that wants him murdered, or the group that wants this woman stoned, they've got to be furious with this answer, because now they've been told that not only this crime, but all these other crimes have the same approach and response. He's speaking to a cultural response, not just this specific incident. And any group on the other side, the Romans that are looking at this and going, what are you talking about? This is completely permissible. Why are we even having this conversation? Now they're being told that she should never go do this again. Both groups are going to be just furious with this answer, because the religious leaders of the day, they would have loved hearing, go and sin no more. And they would have hammered that home day after day after day. But the Romans in that culture would have been going, what are you talking about? That's not sin. Why are you instructing this? Those are ridiculous notions. And so Jesus is taking this middle of approach of saying, you're wrong and you're wrong, this middle ground, this is where you need to be. And so I emphasize that, because just because you take a middle ground doesn't mean that you're trying to keep your hands clean. That's probably the hardest place to be.
Now, there's a couple of things here that I want to point out that are hugely important. one around ideology and one around Jesus. Ideologies do not care at all about people.
No.
Ideologies do not care about people. Now, one of the interesting things that has come up, especially within our culture, our times, it's in huge dialogue, is this idea around racism.
Right.
And it has polarized people when it shouldn't.
Yes.
When it shouldn't. If people don't realize that there is systemic racism in our culture, they may not recognize it, but it's there. It doesn't mean I have to destroy and kill one side and then destroy and kill another side, because the ideologies don't care about people.
No.
And that's incredibly important for us to understand. The people that you associate with in your ideological circle, how you like that one?
That's good.
If the minute you think out of this, outside of that circle, don't for a second think they will not crucify you. They will absolutely reject you in a heartbeat because you don't fit inside that. Listen to me, my brothers and sisters, my friends. Ideologies do not care about people. Secondly, here in this story, which is huge, is there's only one person in that story that could have stoned her.
Jesus.
There's only one person in that story that could have condemned her.
Jesus.
And what does he do?
Lets her go.
Doesn't condemn her. He says, "Where are your accusers?" She says, "They're not here. No one's here to accuse me." And he says, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." That's huge. There's this idea of grace that's played there. Now, is sin important to Jesus?
Yes.
Obviously, sin is important to Jesus. Look at his teachings. He talks about this. But he talks about sin in a way that destroys people, not as an excuse to destroy people. And that is a huge difference. Jesus, through all of his teachings, through all of his miracles, demonstrates the value of the person. There's this one story where there's this guy that has this withered hand.
Yes.
It could, maybe a birth defect. It might have been through a work accident. We don't know, but it's a withered hand. And it's a religious day. It's temple day.
Yep.
Right?
Not supposed to do anything on
Not
temple
supposed
day.
to do anything according to the law. And they set another trap for him. They want to see if Jesus will restore this man's hand so that they have an excuse to kill him because he works on the day.
Heaven forbid.
And Jesus turns to them and asks them a question about the law. They refuse to answer it because they can't and not be hypocritical. And Jesus then turns and heals the man. And they want to kill him. Their ideology of no work on the Sabbath was greater than a man's restoration, that he could go maybe and be a worker again or have value in society, because in that society, if you had birth defects, well, your parents sinned.
Right.
Something your parents did were bad, and their punishment is that God messed you up. He made you blind, right?
That story is a perfect encapsulation. So we're getting a little long today. Let's
Sorry about that, guys. We're passionate about this.
But let's finish on that idea, because I think that encapsulates our response to this in its entirety. And that is, how do we approach polarization from a faith-informed, faith-answered mindset? We're speaking, hopefully, to everybody. Doesn't matter what side you're on. We have people in our church that are on either side of the political landscape, ideological, theological landscape. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because in our church, we are too liberal.
Right.
Or we're too conservative.
Depending on who you talk to.
Depending on who you talk to.
And so when you approach this, our answer, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I'm putting words in your mouth. But for me, I know, right? You love that. First time I've ever done that, by the way, too. But when we approach this answer, we see in the example of Jesus that he is not concerned about where you are on the spectrum. when we approach polarization of thought, our first question should be, how does this love and respect people? Start with the person. Start with the person just like Jesus did. Jesus
a value for the
always
individual.
valued the person, and then approach the conversation. Where you start from changes the conversation. If you want to hold to your political ideology, that's fine. I will never advocate that you have to change your position. Hold that ideology, but start with the person and how it respects them, how it loves them, the way Jesus did, and then work out your ideology through that.
Well, in saying that, one of the things that I carry in my mindset is I try to become a Jesus follower myself.
Right.
A good one. And I mess up all the time, daily, just like everybody else does. Mark Buchanan said something to me one time. He said this. He said, those of you that don't know who he is, he's actually on a podcast in the first season. You can go and listen to him. But he said this to me one time. He said, Shane, if your theology doesn't make you a better lover of God and people, your theology is worthless. And I think that is where we've lost sight. And again, I'm pretty passionate about this. I'm just going to speak of the institution that I'm a part of, religious institutions, that we've lost sight of people. We've wanted to villainize people.
We're really good at loving God.
They're anti-people. And I think in order for us to be a great church, I think for institutions to be great religious institutions, is they have to value not only God and love God well, but they have to value and love people well too.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right.
There we go.
All right. Well, guys, we hope that you have enjoyed this time together working through these things. If you have any comments, if you want to connect with us to talk further, email us. We'll be happy to do that. But I feel like these are some weighty issues, but I think in the next season that we go into, we're going to talk about maybe some practical ways we can go about implementing what we've been talking about in the first two seasons.
Moving forward, just so you guys know, we're actually going to have a couple guest episodes. There's just a couple people we would love to bring on, have conversations about this.
Yes.
Give you guys, again, a different sound, different viewpoint. So those will be some really exciting episodes. And then we're going to do a special Easter episode.
Yes.
Before we take a short break. And then we'll come back with season 3 in the spring. So we got a few more episodes to go. Lots of great conversation. No shortage of great coffee. So we hope that you guys keep tracking with us.
And maybe we can get Tony to come on and drink coffee too.
That would be a miracle.
He's trying it.
There you go.
He did like the whiskey barrel one.
He did like the whiskey barrel. Thank you guys for joining us. This is episode 6 of season 2. Have yourself a wonderful day, weekend, whenever you're listening to this, and God bless.
Be blessed.